Hello, DCPS families, and welcome to Parent University. My name is Taylor Stanley. I'm the Family Engagement Specialist for DC Public Schools, and I'm really glad to be with you all here tonight to talk about the specific topic of grief and also grief during the pandemic. The reason why we felt this topic was important is because a lot of us are dealing with feelings that we've never felt before in terms of how we approach loss. One of the things that we'll talk about here is that you don't necessarily have to have lost someone to COVID-19 to experience grief and to experience the feelings of loss. And that it will present itself in different ways in how you grieve. And then also there are different approaches for how you grieve. And so I'm really glad that we have an amazing team here to talk with us about it. Before we start, subtitles are available in Spanish, French, Chinese, and Vietnamese. So you can follow along that way. If you have questions, for those of you all who speak Spanish, we do have someone here who is able to translate your questions so we can answer them. But what you do, you look for the gear icon in the bottom right corner of the video player, select the captions that work best for you, and then you can select the languages from that list. And so we want to make this workshop as accessible as possible, so that's why we've included subtitles. We'll be using this time defining grief, the physiological and behavioral expressions of grief, understanding the process of grief, and then really touching on grief during COVID-19, and then what it looks like to support your child through their grief process. We have two amazing team members who are able to answer specific questions about your personal grief process or your child's grief process. And in the Q&A section, you can ask the questions and we'll have people ready to answer them. As a community best practice, please assume best intentions, go hard on ideas, not on people, and then particularly relevant to now is accepting non-closure. We may not be able to answer all of your questions, but we want to make sure that we are able to address them. With that said, this is a moderated Q&A, so every question may not be posted for live viewing. With that said, because of the personal nature of this topic, if you feel more comfortable asking a question privately and anonymously, you can do that. And if you don't want us to post your question for the rest of the group, we can keep your question private, and our professionals will be able to answer it on a private channel. I do want to say that all of the presenters and facilitators in the workshop will be able to see your question, but the other attendees won't be able to. But we do want to provide that option because of the private nature of grief. And any specific questions that you might have. We also have someone who's available to answer general questions about DCPS. I know that some of you might have questions at that time, so we wanted to make that available too. So launching into what Parent University is, it started off as a series of in-person workshops where families could share what they know and their experiences as families, and parents and family members of DCPS students, where they could learn from other families. We believe that families are the experts in their children, so we wanted to provide space and a community of families to be able to engage with each other, but then also knowing that you want to hear from DCPS. What are we doing to support your child? What do we recommend to support your child? And so this became the foundations of Parent University. I talked a little bit about families being experts in their children. We also believe that families play 5 roles in accelerating student learning. And these were roles that were developed based off of research by our partners, the Flamboyant Foundation. For those of you all who aren't familiar with the Flamboyant Foundation, they help us with our family engagement models, but then also for all of you who have experienced home visits or student-led conferences, these are examples of how we've worked with Flamboyant to really create connections between school and home. But the 5 roles go into communicating high expectations. So that looks like making sure your child's homework is done, telling them the importance of getting an education, monitoring your child's performance. So when that looks like going through old tests, consistently communicating with your child's teacher about how your child is doing in school, supporting learning at home. That's a really big one right now, as you all are really putting on that teacher hat and driving your children to really get that work done under these circumstances. Guiding your child's education looks like helping them find the path that makes sense for them in terms of their educational attainment. So whether for our elementary school families, that looks like choosing a middle school, for middle school families, choosing a high school families, maybe that looks like looking to college or other career alternatives, helping your child make the best decision to grow and develop into the amazing human beings that we want them to be. And then advocating for your child. When you go to parent-teacher conferences, whenever you reach out to your child's teacher or school or even central office, you're advocating for your child. And so one of the things that I want to highlight is that you are probably playing all 5 of these roles on an everyday basis, and they're not mutually exclusive. And so this is another foundational piece of how we view the role of how we view families' roles in their children's education and how we engage with you all on a day-to-day basis. We have an amazing team of panelists here for you. We have Dr. William Blake, who's the director of SEL and school culture. We have Dr. Kenya Coleman, who's the senior director of school mental health. We have Douglas Gotel, the director of trauma responsive schools initiatives, and we have Nigel Jackson, who's the director of school mental health. They are a really great team to work with. I am really happy to be working with them. And if you all have any questions, specific questions, and need personal assistance about mental health, by all means, email them at school.mentalhealth@k12.dc.gov. So without further ado, I think it goes to Nigel now.
Thank you very much, Taylor. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having myself. Thank you for having my team join everybody tonight on this Parent University. We want to open up tonight with this first slide about grief. And if you take a look at the picture, you'll see an image of a heart that's wounded and that has some stitches, like a broken heart. And I'm going to read to you the content that we have on this slide for a reason. So I'm going to read it quickly and then we're going to discuss it a little further. Grief is the response to loss, particularly the loss of someone or something that has died, to which a bond or affection was formed. And the reason why we chose to read that is because this is the common understanding of grief. For those of you who have familiarity with this, I'm going to ask that you type into the chat feature a word that you have in your mind that you associate with grief. Okay. Taylor, can you go to the next slide? So, although grief is associated with the death of an actual person, it is not limited to just that. Grief can encompass any loss that we deem significant. I've listed a few here, such as a loss of a job, or retirement, or a relationship breakup. All of those offer a sense of loss. I want to ask the community listening right now to think of other examples of loss that may be abstract and not simply a physical death. Although conventionally focused on the emotional response to loss, grief also has physical expressions. For example, grief can cause stress, and this reaction is linked to the emotional processing parts of the frontal lobe. There are other responses to grief and loss, such as cognitive, behavioral, social, cultural, spiritual, and philosophical dimensions. My colleague Douglas Gotel will cover some of those expressions of grief in greater detail coming up shortly. For now, we're going to go to the next slide where we talk about the different types of grief. I used to think that grief was just grief. And I'm not sure if any of you out there are like me, but I literally thought that grief was grief until I started discovering that there were different types of grief. In this slide, we've listed 16 different types of grief, but I'm only going to focus on 3: normal grief, anticipatory grief, and complicated grief. Normal grief is movement towards acceptance of the loss and a gradual alleviation of the symptoms, as well as the ability to continue to engage in basic daily activities. Anticipatory grief is different than the grief response felt after a death and does not necessarily make the latter any easier. However, it can allow those who love the individual to slowly and gradually prepare for and absorb the reality of the loss. Also, for some, definitely not all, but for some, it allows for meaningful time spent with the individual, lending to a sense of closure and peace. That's anticipatory grief. And the last type of grief that I'm going to cover is complicated grief. Complicated grief refers to grief reactions and feelings of loss that are debilitating, long-lasting, and impair your ability to engage in daily activities. It's important to note that there are some who say that complicated grief is just grief combined with other mental disorders such as depression or anxiety. Grief is one of the most difficult processes to endure, and therefore one of the most difficult processes to understand. Dr. Coleman will touch on ways of understanding grief later in this workshop. It is important to know that classifying grief into these different types may offer a sense of control to those trying to understand where they are or where a loved one is. Sometimes defining a feeling or an emotion can give us that sense of control because it gives us language to label our experience and can possibly lead to a specific kind of support. I'm not going to cover the remaining types of grief on the slide, but I want you to know that grief is broken down into many different types, and if you're interested in exploring them, you can do so. Thank you, and I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Douglas Gotel.
Thank you, Nigel. Good evening, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about grief and how it manifests in the body. Grief is experienced in the body, and it is surprising of really how physical grief can be. Your heart literally aches. A memory may come up that could cause your stomach starts to churn and you feel a lump in your throat. Some nights your mind might race, and so does your heart along with it. And sometimes you can barely sleep. Other nights you can be so tired that your head hits, as soon as it hits the pillow, you fall asleep. But you wake up the next morning still exhausted, and just getting out of bed can seem insurmountable. Now, stress links the emotional and the physical aspects of grief. And there's systems in the body that process physical and emotional stress, and they overlap. And emotional stress can activate the nervous system as easily as physical threats can. Grief increases inflammation, which can worsen health problems that you already have, that you may have, and it can cause new ones. This is when there's chronic grief, and it's complicated, as Nigel put it. It can batter your immune system and weaken that system and leave you vulnerable to infection, because it is such connected in the body. And when grief is chronic and heartache is chronic, your blood pressure can also be affected, and can put you at risk of blood clots. Intense grief, when it is unaddressed and it's prolonged, depending on the type of loss you've had, it can even cause something called broken heart syndrome. And that's a form of heart disease with the same symptoms as a heart attack. But really, in short, emotional pain activates the same regions of the brain as physical pain, and that's why grief hurts so much. Because our mind and body are interconnected, the physical symptoms, they are real. They feel very real. And body scan meditation is a good way to release tension and emotional pain, so that because you may not even realize what you're experiencing. And again, Nigel mentioned that losses are very, very different. Even though it may not be a death, we could be grieving and not even realizing that we're grieving something that we have lost, something that has gone missing, that we have some connection to. But body scanning involves paying attention to parts of the body and bodily sensations in a gradual sequence from feet to head. It's a type of meditation, and by mentally scanning yourself, you can bring awareness to every single part of your body and noticing any aches and pains, tension, or general discomfort, and bringing those types of things into awareness. So I want to invite you this evening to do a brief body scan meditation with me. I'm going to ring a bell, and I want you to listen for as long as you can hear the chime. So let's begin by bringing attention into your body. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, and if not, you can find a spot on the floor to just to put your eyes. And I want you to just notice wherever you're seated this evening, wherever you're seated, just to feel and notice the weight of your body in the seat. And I want you to take a breath. And as you take a breath, bring in more oxygen to enliven the body. Exhale. Now I want you to notice your feet on the floor. Just notice the sensation of your feet touching the floor. Notice any sensations there. Perhaps even the warmth of your feet covering the floor. I want you to notice now your your legs. Notice your legs pressed against whatever you're sitting on. Just notice the pressure beneath your legs, any heaviness or lightness. I want you to sit back and just put your attention right now on your back against the seat that you're sitting in. Just feel your back against the chair or the sofa. Is the sofa plush? Does it feel hard? Notice any sensations there. Bring attention to your stomach area for just a moment. Is it tense? If it's tense, just let it soften for a moment. Take a breath and exhale. Notice your hands. You feel any tension in your hands? If there's tension there, just let them soften and just notice your hands for a moment. Notice your arms. Feel any sensation in your arms. And if your shoulders are tense, just soften them and let them relax. Bring attention to your face and notice if you feel any tension in your face, your jawline. And if there's tension, just notice it. Just notice any expression on your face and relax it. Bring attention to your whole body. Just notice your whole body, where you're sitting. Notice any sensation. Just notice your body, that you're alive. Be aware of your whole body as best as you can. Take a breath and exhale. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Now, the goal of doing body scanning is not really to relieve pain completely, and it may not even change what you're feeling in the moment, but mindfully observing your thoughts, your feelings, or any body messages or sensation without judgment or reaction, it helps to the body and the mind to perhaps find some peace and refuge in time of great change, such as adjusting to a major loss. So I want to focus now on some other expressions of grief. And you'll see that on the next slide there, that just notice this particular quote. Everyone can master grief, but he that has it. And feel free in the chat to say what that means for you. But what it means, and that's a quote from William Shakespeare's play, Much Ado About Nothing. Now, what I take from this quote is that it's easy to sympathize or to offer advice to someone who's been dealing with a loss. If you've never dealt with a devastating loss yourself, it's very easy to dole out advice. But the other thing about this is that, in this country, everything moves so fast. We work longer days than other industrialized countries, and really there's like this underlying uncommunicated expectation to get over one's grief or to get back to being productive. Sure, most are given a few days for bereavement, but when grief is felt, it's not that simple. It can feel ugly. It can be ugly, and it's painful. You don't just get over grief when someone dies. You learn how to live with a new relationship of that which is no longer there. And really, the prescription for grief is to grieve. So how we express our grief really has a number of factors to it, and the intensity of a grief response. And we'll see this in the next slide. That our coping mechanisms, some of our cultural norms and customs, and really the strength and availability of our support system and the circumstances around a death, they all play a role in how we react to loss. And we grieve differently. We grieve differently. I want everyone to hear that this evening, and that there is no way, there's no particular way to grieve. It is a personal process for each person. We shouldn't be anyone shouldn't be expected to grieve in a certain way. But there are some expressions of grief that have common themes. Certainly periods of deep sadness, inability to perform daily tasks and routines because they feel overwhelmingly burdensome. Certainly ranges of emotional expression from anger, rage, denial, guilt, despair, confusion, shock, disbelief, anxiousness and fatigue, lots of crying, of course, and dreams and nightmares, really depending on what happened. But grief is largely a function of our relational attachment to someone or something. I call it it's the last act of love, really. So let's talk about grief and children for a moment in the next slide. And there are different developmental tasks with grief, but and with children, it comes in many forms, and it's certainly as diverse as the children who are experiencing the loss. Once children accept a death, they're likely to display, feelings of sadness off and on over longer periods of time, especially around times such as birthdays and holidays. But it comes at unexpected moments as well. For younger children, they may reenact memories of the deceased person in their play or in their drawings to express their longing and their desire for reconnection. Now, this is normal, healthy expression. It really helps facilitate the grief process for children because they work through it in their own way. And you can expect some regression and behaviors of earlier stages of development and some increased clinginess. And for children, grief is intermittent and it weaves in and out of their play. Now, children may internalize their grief as well because they may feel like they don't have permission, or that it will make things worse when the whole family is affected and caregivers are grieving as well. But it's very important to communicate to your child that, if I seem sad or if I'm not myself, it's nothing that you have done. It's because I feel sad because someone died and we're all feeling sad. If I seem sad, just know that I'll always have time for you. And if you're feeling sad too, it's okay to tell me. You want to make sure that you give your child permission during a time of bereavement for the family. And it's also normal too that during the weeks following a death that some children they may have the belief that the family member may still be alive, and that's normal too, for younger kids. But the long-term denial of a death or of outright avoidance of grief, when it's really acute and it's long-lasting, that can be unhealthy and can lead to more severe problems. Now, children who are having some problems with grieving and their grief process is complicated, they may show signs of a really extended period of depression where there's a loss of interest in activities, interest in daily activities and events, sleep disturbances, and a prolonged fear of being alone. Again, regression, acting much younger, but we're talking about over a long, experience, a long time. If your child has gone back to thumb sucking and, bedwetting, that sort of thing, and it's happening a year later, or even eight months later, that's something that you want to be having some concerns about. Certainly, imitating, a person who's deceased, withdrawal from friends, and then of course school performance, or refusing to go to school. Those are all indicators that the grief process isn't, the child is having some difficulties with their grief process, and then there may be a need for to work with a specialist in that area. But there are some developmental expectations and around how a child understands and responds to death. Really depends on their developmental stages as well, and we've got a slide for that to kind of go over some of that in brief. But while we can't always say that a 5-year-old will respond the same, we can anticipate some generalities. Most 3-year-olds, they're concrete thinkers, and they don't really understand the finality of death, whereas 11-year-olds around that age, they tend to be quite fascinated with death and want a lot of details, and that's normal, even though the questions may make us uncomfortable as adults. And teenagers, they certainly can understand the cycle of life and recognize that death is inevitable, but they are also more prone to suppress their feelings, and they may act out with risk-taking behaviors. And certainly how we react to teens is not the same as an elementary school kid, but the needs are similar. I'm going to talk about ways to support your child's grief process further in the presentation. And the list that you see here on the screen is not exhaustive of all of the developmental responses, but the full document will be provided in the link of references at the end of the presentation for your consideration. And I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Coleman. And just want to unmute yourself. There you go.
Thanks, Douglas. Earlier in our presentation, you shared that grief isn't simple or pretty, that grief can be complicated and sometimes look and feel ugly. And so I'd like to spend some time with everyone this afternoon, really to offer some explanations as to why grief may work that way. There are several different ways that we can look at it. So grief has been studied by many theorists. Today, we're going to look at a couple. We're going to start with the most contemporary theory of grief, which is the dual process, discovered by Margaret Shrube and Henk Schutt. They proposed that grief is a dual process, that when we're experiencing grief, that we are either oscillating between what they call the loss orientation or the restoration orientation. The loss orientation is the expression of emotion, and the restoration orientation is the accepting of new roles. According to Shrube and Schutt, we have achieved balance when we are able to both allow ourselves to feel the emotion that accompanies a loss while still accepting that the loss has occurred. Another more contemporary model are the 6 R's proposed by Dr. Teresa Rondo. Now, she defines mourning in 6 distinct stages, all beginning with R so that you can easily remember them. These are recognize the loss, react to the separation, recollect and re-experience, relinquish old attachments, readjust and reinvest. As we go through these stages, we begin to make the necessary accommodations to exist with a new normal. Let's take a deeper dive with the remaining two. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a psychiatrist who studied grief intently. She's one of the foremost theorists in the field, and she suggests that grief is experienced in stages. The first stage that she offers up is denial. In this stage, this is where we go numb, and that numbness has a purpose. Primarily, it helps us to doing this last sentence. Primarily, it allows us to absorb the initial shock, and it makes survival possible. Once we move from denial and we allow ourselves to begin to feel all of the emotions that normally accompany loss, we tend to mask it with anger. Anger is what we call a surface emotion, and it masks everything else that comes underneath it. So the vulnerability, the fear, the anxiety, the hopelessness, the helplessness, the guilt is all masked under anger, because anger is easier to express than some of the other emotions. Now, once you get past the anger, you try to start to control the situation. And more often than not, we do this by bargaining. If this, then that. If you take the pain away, then I will do better. This is our last attempt to control our situation. And once we realize that we can't change our circumstance, that's when the sadness sets in. Kubler-Ross identifies this particular stage as depression, and it is marked by emptiness and sadness. But day by day, we develop new strategies, and over time, we begin to cope with or accept the loss. The most important thing that I want to point out about this particular theory is that it's not linear. Though I've given you the stages of grief in a linear fashion, you don't have to experience them that way. You may go directly into anger, then followed by denial. As Douglas has already shared, grief is very personal. It may not happen for you this way. Another very important thing I want to call out for Kubler-Ross is that grief is not linear. It's very much so cyclical. And so you can find yourself going from one stage to another in circles. I'll give you an example. I fully acknowledge that yesterday was Mother's Day, and we all have our own different reactions to Mother's Day. You may find yourself today at a completely different stage than you were just a week ago. And if you are, that's okay. Now, Worden didn't necessarily like the ideas of stages associated with grief. Instead, he suggested that there are tasks associated with grief. In his opinion, grief is work. The first thing that you have to do is to accept the reality of the loss. Most of us do this by attending a funeral or a memorial. And once you are able to do that, then you're really able to allow yourself to feel the sadness, the pain, the fear, the anger, all of the other emotions that come with loss. And Worden really recommends that you be bold here and allow yourself to feel them. In his opinion, they're unavoidable. So there's no need to run from them. They won't go away until you've opened the door, allowed them in your space, have entertained them. Then they can go away. And when they go away, you can begin to adjust to your new environment. Now, this environment can be both external and internal. For example, a recent widow would have to both learn to adjust to taking on extra household responsibilities, which is an external adjustment, while at the same time will have to become comfortable with living alone or doing things by themselves, which is an internal adjustment. The final task is to find a way to remain emotionally connected to our loved ones. Douglas is going to share some strategies on how to do that later on in our presentation. For now, my colleague William will discuss grief and loss as it relates to COVID-19.
Thank you, Kenya and the team for all of the information that was shared thus far. During this moment, I would like for us to really take a moment just to reflect on the impact of COVID-19, not only for our students, but for our families as well. Throughout the course of this presentation thus far, you will have learned a variety of strategies of how to cope with grief and how to identify the grief, whether it's within your students or whether it's within yourself. This next section, we're going to be very, very intentional to discuss how COVID-19 has added to the impact of how this will show up for our students and our families during this difficult time. So when you transition to the next slide, this next slide will definitely share the impact that COVID-19 has brought on due to our families and our community stakeholders that has experienced grief and loss. Normally, during a time of loss, we are connected through touch, and we are connected by being with our family and friends. However, during COVID-19, we have to practice social distancing, and we cannot be in crowds of 10 or more or 15 or more in different spaces. So that prevents us and inhibits us from really being around the love and support that is needed in order to fully cope with the grief and or loss that we might be experiencing. Also, the impact due to COVID-19 is preventing us of traveling and spending time with our loved ones or close family members who might be sick or might have passed away. So the inability to travel definitely through air is definitely a huge impact, which has been brought to us due to COVID-19. But the one that I'm sure that is really, really troublesome for many of our families, many of our adults, and many of our students is not having the opportunity to really bring closure by attending, services or arrangements in person. We know that during this time right now, a lot of funeral homes are holding virtual arrangement ceremonies for families to bring closures. And we can imagine that could be a very, very, very difficult time to experience during this moment. And due to COVID-19, we are not able to really touch and really give that last goodbye in person due to the restrictions of social distancing. So it's very important for us to acknowledge the impact that COVID-19 has brought on, not only to our adults and families, but very specifically for our students. And we know that this is a very, very difficult time. But prior to this, with the slides that you are seeing so far, it is our hope that you are able to grieve appropriately and use these strategies that you all learned during this webinar thus far. So as we transition to the next slide, we're going to continue to talk about the impact of grief and loss. And with that, grieving, it really allows us and involves us to adjust to the loss. But due to COVID-19, like I said, there are many parameters that are in place for us to readjust and to adjust our new way of living and our new normal to the loss that we might be experiencing. And something that I want to call out right here is definitely on the last bullet, is that grief is not a passive process, but rather one that is worked through the bereaved. And during this time, although we have many parameters and although we have many restrictions, I want to connect some of the social emotional learning competencies to this process, where you could use the art of mindfulness. And mindfulness allows you just to simply to reflect, just to simply to meditate on your current experience during that time. And I believe that mindfulness through the use of meditation will definitely support you during your journey to really adjust to your new normal of grief and loss during this pandemic. So as we go on to the next slide, we're going to pass it along to our colleagues to share how to support the grief process with our children and teens.
So I just want to first, acknowledge for anyone who is with us this evening, who's lost anyone to COVID-19, whether it be a family member or a friend. I want to offer my condolences this evening. But when we're talking about kids and grief, the most important thing to do, even though, there's a lot of emotion involved, is to really allow your child to have a safe place to express their emotions. Again, there's a wide range of emotions that come with grief, and we've shared about those earlier: pain, shame, perhaps guilt, other powerful emotions, especially when we, have to go to a memorial service virtually, perhaps, or we can't go at all. There may not be that opportunity to say goodbye and to have a healthy goodbye. And that can bring a lot of a lack of closure and feelings around that. And with young children, of course, they may not be able to verbalize what they're feeling. But whatever emotion that there is, we certainly want to avoid minimizing the emotions or telling anyone how they should feel, or try to put a positive spin on it. We want to act as a sounding board and validate their child's feelings. Yes, it is a sad time. Yes, it's okay to feel what you're feeling. We just have to feel it. And this helps them, by inviting the story. Every person has a story that is connected with the person or thing that is lost, and you want to invite the story and honor the story and witness, be a witness and hold that story for your child. That is how we get through the grief. So I want to offer you now one art-based strategy that you can use to help your child sort through many emotions that they may be experiencing after a loss. This one is called Color Your Heart. And the heart, as we know, is a universal symbol that represents feelings, and love particularly, and it's often used throughout therapy. But this is something that I use in session, but it's something that you can certainly use really to be a bridge with your child for conversations about what it is they might be feeling after the loss. So you can draw a heart, on a sheet of paper, and put some lines next to it. The little boxes is where the child will color in colors that represent different feelings. And you want to explain to your child that everyone has feelings or emotions when someone dies, and that is normal. And you want to explain that there's no right or wrong way to do this. You certainly can draw a heart or use a template from the internet. And you want to brainstorm a list of emotions with your child that they can think of. And if they can't come up with any, then you certainly can make some suggestions for them. And they're all we have eight or so general emotions that we have: happy, sad, scared, guilt, confusion, nervous. And when you're doing this activity, you certainly can do it right along with them. That also is permission giving with your child. Using crayons, colored pencils, or markers, you want to have your child then choose what colors that match the emotion for them. For anger, it might be red. For sadness, it might be blue. And you want to have your child to color in. Then you want to have them to work with the heart and ask them, to color in how much of that feeling that they might be feeling. You want to color in the heart with that color and show where it is and how much it is. So that gives a child a way to sort the different emotions, but there's also a visual representation to really get a sense of where your child is, in their emotionality. If they are really sad about things, or if they're really confused about things, that then is a conversation starter for you, and it's a way to promote communication of feelings. And you might just ask open-ended questions, not to interpret what it is that you're seeing, but to just ask open-ended questions. Notice things. I notice all of the blue that you put here. Can you tell me more about that? So you're not doing therapy with your child, but what you are doing is just creating a bridge for communication. And this is particularly useful when you have a child who just kind of shuts down and they internalize and they don't talk much, or they haven't really had any expression. After a loss, this is a way to just kind of create some connection and open up dialogue. So I hope that you find this one helpful. And this is good for working with younger kids, your elementary age kids, and we'll talk about Dr. Blake will talk about something that you might use with your student who might be a little bit older or reaching adolescence.
Thank you for that strategy, Douglas, Dr. Mr. Gotel, and to continue to add to this piece. This other strategy is we received it from one of our external partners, Turnaround for Children. And with this strategy, we call it the head, heart, and hand strategy. And specifically, this tool specifically will allow students to really reflect on their experiences through their emotions in their head, through their emotions in their hands, and through their emotions in their heart. And this can be used for for all levels of students, whether they are an elementary, middle, or high school student. And just to give you an example of how you would use this tool, It's pretty much a reflective tool that allows you to ask questions to identify current emotional feelings within your body. And this really pulls on our social awareness competency when we talk about social emotional learning. And within DCPS, when we talk about self-awareness, we want to make sure that our students have the ability to understand their experiences, thoughts, emotions, and values, and how they impact one's behaviors in a social context. So going back to this tool, some of the question prompts that you can use are the following. So when it comes to your head, if you notice that a student is dealing with grief of loss, ask them, what are you thinking about? Are your thoughts clear and jumbled? Is your mind racing? Or are you aware of your breath? And this right there will allow them to reflect on their emotions that's currently going on in their head. What's most important of this tool that I love so much is it really focuses on the heart as well, and it really allows you to understand like what you currently feel inside of your heart. And it asks you really targeted questions such as, what do you notice about your heart right now? Is it racing? Is it pacing very, very fast? Do you feel tight or relaxed? And by doing so and focusing intentionally on these questions, you are able to regulate your actions and to regulate your mind, body, and soul during your time of experiencing grief and loss. And the last one around your hands, it asks you, like, how does your hands feel? Are they calm or jittery? Do they feel clammy or dry? Are they clenched or relaxed? And this right here allows you to focus on 3 major body parts onto your body. And it allows students and or families to take a moment to reflect so you can regulate your thoughts and your emotions so that you are able to cope successfully with the grief or loss you are experiencing. So this tool right here just really allows you just to really become in tune with how you are feeling physically, because as you noticed earlier in the slides, we talked about the physical symptoms of grief and loss. And this really allows you to drill down intentionally on those physical symptoms so that you can cope with grief or loss holistically throughout your whole body. So this is a tool that we definitely encourage you to use with your students, with your children, and you also could use with yourself as well, so you can identify different pressure points within your body so you could cope with this grief and loss successfully.
I'm almost certain that while we were reviewing the different theoretical perspectives earlier today, that I used my hand or made some other gesture to make note of fluidity. And that's because grief is fluid. It does in fact come in waves, some big waves, some small waves, but it definitely ebbs and flows. It is important that you and your student acknowledge both experiences and give yourselves grace to grieve. I also hinted at this while discussing Kubler-Ross's model, but believe it or not, routines can be a very powerful weapon. Strictly adhering to your daily schedule plays a pivotal role in your ability to obtain a sense of normalcy, and if nothing else, to maintain a sense of control. So your resilience is actually demonstrated when you participate in normal day-to-day activities after you've experienced a loss. So your rigidity can be revolutionary.
You can support your child by helping them find ways to cope with overwhelming emotions through thinking strategies, healthy distractions, and self-soothing by mindfully engaging our senses. For some, physical activity may be a pathway, This is the one that I personally use to manage overwhelming emotions. I have some heavy stuff going on right now with my family, and my physical activity has become a needed part of my ability to cope. There are a host of neurological advantages of physical activity, including a boost of endorphins, and it can also help regulate your sleep, which is often disrupted by stress, anxiety, and depression. For others, art journaling is a much welcomed guided practice. Last week, I supported a school with a crisis, and we did an art activity around grief. The person leading our group had us trace our hand with a marker on a piece of paper, and after we had the outline of our hand, we placed colors, expressions, shapes, anything we wanted inside of our hand. And similar to the exercise that Douglas had us do earlier, it really opened up room for a conversation with ourselves about the colors we selected. How did those colors, although I chose those vibrant colors because the person that I lost was vibrant, or this was the feeling that I have when I think of them. But art journaling can be a much welcomed guided practice. For some, engaging your different senses can be a way to cope. So for example, if you're a visual person, you can surround yourself with inspiring images, sound, and so on. You can help your child identify the different activities that work well for them and develop a plan when these feelings arise. Make room for your own self-care. Just like the oxygen mask theory, you must take care of yourself first before you can support your child. Implement healthy coping, tap into your support networks, and express your emotions. This way, you can serve as a role model for your child. It's okay to show your child a range of emotions. It may normalize the emotions that they feel. I'll give you one example for how to care for your mind, body, and spirit. First, for your mind, have things to look forward to in the future, even if they're small things like lunch with a friend, a virtual chat, starting a new book, etc. This can help you get through the immediate future. Don't be surprised if your enjoyment of these things isn't the same. This is normal. Now we'll go to your body. Release your emotions, cry, hit a pillow, yell in the shower, or use a stress ball. And for your spirit, be present in the good moments. Don't underestimate the healing effects of small pleasures like a smile, a shared laugh, a sunset, a favorite food, or a walk outside. Grief is exhausting, mentally, physically, and emotionally. You know yourself and your nature. Some folks in this workshop this evening are introverted, and they may replenish their energy by spending time alone. Some folks who are more extroverted may replenish their energy through interaction with others. Most importantly, give yourself some grace. Be gentle and do what feels helpful for you. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Douglas Gotel now.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. You said something that was, really poignant, and that was about, savoring the moments, of even though if it's just a small pleasure or a smile, and it's so important, in your own grief journey, to remind your child and remind yourself that it is okay to be happy and to make new memories. You aren't letting go of the person by having some enjoyment. It's also, important that, if you and your family is not able to participate in a community memorial or some act of remembrance, to honor the loved one who has died, that to create an opportunity through other means to say goodbye, and to honor and have connection with the memory of that person. You can create your own memorial service at home. And in the absence of being able to attend in person. And you can create a memorial that's based on foundational elements of most memorial services: music, memories, and expression, and activities such as candle lighting, or even, depending on what your culture is or ethnic background, pouring libations, or planting a tree or some other flora that you could choose to video as keepsake, and even inviting others into that recording virtually. And you also want to consider what role you'd like for your child to play in that memorial. They have a connection to that person too, perhaps, and involving them in some way that might be meaningful can be helpful for your child. Now, in our resources, we've included a guide for planning memorials at the end of the presentation that you can review, and that you might find helpful. There are lots of remembrance activities that you can do to facilitate the task of grieving that was outlined earlier, in establishing that enduring relationship with the person who is no longer here. And one of the things that you can do, you can just write a letter to that person who might bring closure. Sometimes when a death is sudden, there's always, oh, I wish I could have said this, or I just wanted to tell them how much I love them. And you have to get that out, and you can put pen to paper to have that closure for yourself, or help your child to do that. Either they write a card, the things that you wanted to say that maybe you didn't get a chance to say. And there's also things that you can do, like, having your child to decorate rocks. We call them memory rocks, with some tempera paint and, rocks outside. These are things that you can find, easily at Michael's or some of the craft stores. They carry the rocks that, are kind of smooth on the outside, so you can paint on them. And to, take those, at another time, to a site, perhaps a burial site, or to put it somewhere, that has some meaning. I volunteered for a grief camp for a number of years, and one of the things that we would do, for all of the campers is we would have the participants they would have a wooden boat, and they would paint the boat and decorate it. A child would decorate that boat and anything with any things that reminded them of their loved one. And we would all go down to the Severn River, and in a controlled area, and each person we call that person's name, and they would then release that boat into the water, with the idea that their memories that you can keep, and their memories that you might want to let go of. And we literally put them down by the riverside. And there are lots of ways and tokens of remembrance, but it is all about facilitating a healthy goodbye. Grief is about remembering. Having your child create a memory box, letting them have free reign to decorate it in whatever way that they want to, and to find things that remind the person Remind your child of the person and have them put them there. And memories are connected to items. Perhaps the sweater that person wore all the time, cologne, fragrance, or a bracelet or a gift that person gave you. Seeing them and holding those items brings back memories of the stories that are connected to the item and that person. And talking about the person initially, it's going to be sad when you're in that part of the grief process. But when it's a healthy, normal grief, eventually the stories are about remembrance, the things that were most endearing about the person. And when you do those kinds of, show and share, on days of remembrance that you might choose, it's okay to invite that, the things that remind you of that person, just, have them there. And, if it's a family thing, everybody can take a turn, for telling that story. But grief is about remembering.
We would like to end today's presentation by stopping and sharing how incredibly important it is for you to ask for help. There is no shame, there is no blame, there is nothing to be bashful about asking for help. We encourage you to first and foremost to stay connected to your support system, either via phone, via email, via text, or a virtual platform. But we also want to let you know that it's absolutely okay to seek the help of a mental health care professional for you and or your student if you need it. So we are definitely supporting students and families while learning from home. You can get in contact with the Department of Behavioral Health. They are accepting referrals right now. You can access their services by contacting 1-887-WE-HELP or 1-887-934-4357. If you have access to private insurance, you can contact your insurance provider to get a list of in-network providers who are providing teletherapy. But last and certainly not least, your school mental health teams are still meeting and are still supporting students. If you would like to get support from a member of your school behavioral health team, that can be social workers, psychologists, counselors, and any of our agency partners, you can either reach out to your school principal or send an email directly to us. We also want to acknowledge that crises do happen, and if you find yourself experiencing a crisis, please call 911 for immediate support.
In addition to the crises that may happen individually at home where you would call 911, there may be crises that happen in a school or with your students during the learning from home process. We have had several crises since the quarantine began that have occurred involving DCPS students and families. We have a central office crisis support team that when we were in our physical school buildings would go to schools when there was a crisis, and we would do classroom presentations, small group counseling, or individual support when there was a crisis. Since the quarantine started, we have continued that crisis support with our school communities. However, it's just done virtually now. But your students' entire school community, parents, local community members, staff, and students are still able to receive crisis support from the professionals on the central office crisis support response team.
So while we focus solely on grief today, we are, DCPS is, definitely committed to the whole child. The school mental health team has curated a list of resources to help parents and educators support student wellness. We have provided a link to that particular site in the documents, along with a physical copy of the resource list. Please be sure to access it. I saw in the questions earlier today that there was a question related to supporting a student with autism. There is a link to supportive services, especially around COVID-19 for students with autism. So I encourage you to look at that list. The list includes tips about talking to children and youth, specifically around COVID-19, managing emotions, establishing a routine, and we've talked about how powerful that can be. And offers creative activities for family engagement, among other things. So we encourage you to take a look at it and take from it anything that you think will be a benefit to you and your family.
Sorry. I do want to open up the floor for questions. We have, I really appreciate our experts giving us insight into the grieving process. One of the questions that I had, Dr. Coleman, is when you were talking about the grief models, how do you know which one applies most to you, or is that not how it works? How do you determine, as a person who's grieving, how you should approach your own grief?
There's no one way to view grief, which is why there's so many different theories out there, because people are dynamic, right? So when we're talking about theories, we offer different theories for different perspectives. So there is no right or wrong way. The way that you look at grief is definitely specific to you. We just simply offered up some explanations. For some people, they may understand the idea that grief is work, because it does take a commitment to yourself, for lack of better words, to work through all of the emotions that come with grief. Some people may appreciate knowing that it's okay if you find yourself going in cycles, for lack of a better word, with your grief. So there really is no right or wrong theory related to grief, just different explanations to help you where you are at.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I did want to highlight the fact that we had one of our family members say that they also use Fruit Loops to identify feelings. They do like a Fruit Loop bracelet and assign each color a feeling, and I thought that was a really nice strategy as well. I'm wondering, you all actually brought up a lot of feelings that I've felt as someone who has grieved. And I know that there have been times where I lost my father in 2013, but being surrounded by loss, especially because it seems so present now, I start feeling pieces of my own grief, and I really appreciate how you all talked about how you don't necessarily the missing pieces of you don't grow, don't heal. You learn to live with that, and I think that the model that Dr. Coleman, you talked about with the tasks, I think reminds me the most of how we will all have to adjust and acknowledge life adjust to life overall post-COVID. And so I really appreciate you calling that out. I do have a toddler with me, so you know, and I do appreciate all of you all who are present with your children, our presenters who have been present. You know, Nigel mentioned that he's engaging in his own process of grief in his family, and I want to acknowledge the fact that you know, DCPS employees are also experiencing pain as well, that they are grieving, and you know, eventually in the future coming together as a community to acknowledge this collective loss and grief as well, I think will be key. I do want to acknowledge that it's almost 7:30, and I know folks have dinner ready. We talked about, again, Dr. Coleman mentioned that if you have any additional questions, to use the school.mentalhealth@k12.dc.gov website email address to reach out to DCPS staff. Also, our resources will be available at the bit.ly link, bit.ly/parent-use-stress. And so that's where you'll be able to find resources on grief, as well as resources on coping with stress for yourself and your children. And then also, we'd really like to get a sense of how we did with this workshop. So if you have time, please fill out the bit.ly, please go to the bit.ly and fill out the survey, or in the comments, if you could rate us on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being did not appreciate the workshop, to 5 being, you know, this was a great workshop, and we'd love to have you do it again. Speaking of additional workshops, we are in the process of developing more workshops for our community. And so if you go to Eventbrite using the bit.ly link on the screen at bit.ly/DCPS parent-u-RSVP. Sorry, it's almost bedtime is what's happening. You'll be able to find future workshops that we have coming up. We have one about paying for college, which is ideal for our families of seniors and 11th graders. And then we also have a conversation next week about how to talk about sex with your children. I think that's ideal. I want to say for younger, for families with younger children. Now that we're spending more time in the house with our kids, we might be getting a lot more interesting questions, and so being able to answer them will be helpful. But we have a whole slew of workshops that are coming up, and so I'm really excited to hear from you all again, and be able to present more content for you all to really support our families as partners. This is my 3rd workshop with Dr. Coleman, Nigel, Dr. Blake, and Douglas, and it has been an absolute pleasure to do this with them. And to know that these are people who are engaging with our students, and engaging with the professionals who are engaging with our children, I think is such a blessing. And I really appreciate you all's presence as a future DCPS mom in the system to make sure that our children are able to tackle whatever obstacles may come to them from an emotional and mental health standpoint. and your presence in this school system is just invaluable. And I also want to give a special thank you to Ms. Taya and Ms. Michelle, who are engaging with our students on a daily basis and providing these supports as well. And so those were the two wonderful women who were moderating the Q&A and responding to your questions. I want to thank the folks on my team, Claudette Monroy and Natalie Treadgold. They have been really helpful in this. But I think at the end of the day, and my colleagues touched on this multiple times, that there's no clean process to grief, that it's a personal experience. And, even if you have experienced grief yourself, the way that someone else copes with it, it may be completely different. And so allowing grace, not only of yourself, of other people, and to model this grace with your children, and providing a space for people in your family to be emotionally vulnerable in this time especially is warranted, because this is hard. And again, you don't have to have lost somebody to feel grief. We don't know what life is going to be like after this pandemic. We don't know, how we'll have to adjust, and there may be some sort of mourning or grief for the life that was. And so keeping that in mind, that what you're feeling is okay. And that it will look different for everybody. So again, thank you all. Thank you to our presenters. Sending everybody love and peace. Hug your kids. Hug the people who are in your house with you. And we hope to see you at the next workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. You can give us a chance to say thank you too. We appreciate you as well.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you all.